Guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I've got a fantastic guest for you for the holidays, Lisa Sakai, and she's dubs herself your bucket list accelerator, and she's a financial consultant who works with clients. And we're going to talk all about financial independence, building a lifestyle, and so much more. Retirement planning, best way to save, is a 401k enough? And I'm happy to welcome her to the show. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy we were able to get you on, and I know and then kind of set the stage and your experience and how you got to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, I'll take a long story and make it short because of course everybody's journey is too long to tell on a podcast. But basically I started my career in Hollywood, enjoyed it, but didn't find it necessarily satisfying. I had a vision to help more people than I really was able to there, obviously. So I went completely opposite into teaching and found that it was a little too bureaucratic and too many things. And plus, I didn't get the chance to work with my kids or my clients, all the way through their schooling. I can only help them during the year that I was working with them. So, our industry loves teachers, especially in the insurance side of things, because we can explain things in a way that, a little easier way than the financial gurus who got out of school and talk about all the stuff that people can't understand. So I started on the insurance side and I moved into full financial planning, investment management, and really I see my role is to help people live their best life. Basically, how do they get to really what everybody's ultimate goal is, which is financial independence, financial freedom, and being able to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, and having no restraints in life. That's kind of everybody's goal, right?
Yeah, yeah, I love this idea of since transition from early retirement or FIRE, the fire movement, to kind
Yeah,
of work optional because, even you retire early, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? You can't
yeah,
just sit on a beach all day. It gets boring after a
exactly.
while.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, I specialize in working with people who want to retire early, and that's a big part of our discussion is, are we truly retiring early, or are we, going to do
yeah,
some side projects or something like that? Because it's just a matter of what are you going to do with your time more than anything. And I found that, and I see this actually with traditional retirement too, is that when people retire at 65, they think life's going to begin and all of that. But a lot of times they lose their purpose in life. They're not quite sure who they are without their job. Kids are gone, if they have kids, if not, it just, they're not quite sure who they are. They might go on a trip and decide that they actually don't like international travel because it's a lot of headaches and and it's a pain sometimes. And they find that the things that they thought were going to fill their lives maybe isn't it. And it's really a kind of a weird time. So you're just kind of experiencing that earlier with the fire movements. I agree with you. It's kind of work optional kind of idea, get to do the work you want to do and not necessarily work for a paycheck.
yeah.
Has to happen.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And what better place to start than the educational system? And you made a really interesting point is something's wrong is when education becomes bureaucratic because
Yeah.
um one thing is I was talking about with a prior guest is why doesn't school teach us financial literacy? They're teaching us like Pythagorean theorem and calculus and Latin as well. That's a dead language.
Mhm.
Like, why don't they
Yeah.
teach us about finances?
It's so true. There's a report, or I guess he's not a journalist, I should say, or writer. He does financial writing. He wrote The Psychology of Money. His name's Morgan Housel. And if people haven't read his stuff, he's great. And he was saying on a podcast recently, we don't teach about health and we don't teach about financial planning or personal finance. And those are the two most important areas of your life, right? And that's what we don't teach in school. And I totally agree. It's funny because I think health and wealth go together a lot, mainly because they're two kind of, we think there's a formula, but there really isn't a formula because everybody is so different. Like health wise, I mean, you know this better than anybody. Like health wise, there's your metabolism's different than this person's metabolism. You react differently to this diet when that person reacts this way to this diet. or to run. Some people are great at running, some people can't stand running, but doing the elliptical works for them, so it's not like a formula. And the same things with financial planning is everybody thinks there's this formula that I don't know about, that everybody else seems to get, but I don't know about. And what is it? And there's really not a formula. I hate to say it. It's about a balancing act. It's about knowing what you want, staying focused on what you want, being flexible when you need to be flexible, and having a steady hand with the markets and not letting your emotions take over, that kind of stuff. And so there's not really a formula on things. And so they should teach things like balancing your book and how to live within your means, which there are some formulas for that, but they don't teach any of it anymore. I mean, I had a 24-year-old call me, I have clients that young, and he was like, you want to check? And I have my checkbook here. And he goes, I have no idea how to fill this out because he's never had to. He's 24. Like, when do we do checks anymore? So he was embarrassed, but he's like, I figured I could learn from you. I'm like, it's okay. So I taught him how to write a check.
Yeah.
It's just stuff like that happens. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that there's really no formula.
Yeah.
And if we taught it as a formula, most people forget that stuff, honestly. They memorized it for a test and then they throw it away. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting because yeah, you mentioned check, and the other day someone was telling me to go into the bank branch, and I was like, I haven't walked into a bank branch since 2002, and like I don't have any checks, for over,
Yep.
I mean, over
Yep.
20 years.
It's true. Yeah, but it's funny. Financial institutions were
Yeah.
way behind the times. And then they've actually caught up quite a bit since the pandemic, but they still want a voided check. They still want a statement with your name on it. Like, it's funny how that works, is they still can't figure out a different way to like verify it's you. Although it's funny, there's some kind of new algorithm, at least at Schwab, this happened, where
Yeah.
I tried to put in somebody's banking information, and they were like, this information doesn't connect or something. Like, I'd put one number in wrong, but they can tell it's not his account. So, they have some ways of checking, but they still want the verifications of
Yeah.
the voided check and stuff.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, that's interesting. And then I kind of want to talk about 401ks because
Yeah.
this brings me in, because I'm like more recently just talking to people like 401ks is not enough either. But what is financial perfectionism? You alluded to it, but
Yeah.
kind of elaborate on it.
So I'm glad you caught that. Financial perfectionism is what we think. We think everybody else has it all together and we're the ones that are floundering. I think the most common thing I hear from people when I talk to them
Oh,
as like a prospect or something is, we're a financial mess. And that's not really true. I mean, there are some times I'm like, oh yeah, maybe we are a little bit, but it's okay. But most of the time people have some stuff in place. They've done some good work, but they just think that there's that weird missing piece that they're not getting. And so it almost makes it so that it's defeating to even try, because we think, Sally over there has this amazing house. What is she doing? And what has she got everything in place? And how come I don't have that in place? And there must be something wrong with me. And what you're not seeing is that Sally is, got very little equity because she keeps borrowing from the house, and she's maybe, not paying, gonna paycheck to paycheck, even though she makes, way into six figures. There is a pandemic that's kind of happening right now where we have a lot of six-figure earners paycheck to paycheck right now, because it's all about, keeping up with the Joneses a little bit too much. And so I call it kind of financial dysmorphia almost, because we take that vision of what we think everybody else is doing and we think we're such a mess when it comes to things, and it's really not true.
yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because I was reading where financial independence and being able to retire early, it's not about this magic formula, it's more about habits like
It
savings
is.
and
Yeah.
living within your means and not keeping
Yeah.
up with the Joneses and all.
Exactly. Now, and everybody thinks it's the rate of return you're supposed to be getting, but it's
Yeah,
really those components that you're talking about: saving, living in your means, knowing what you want, and make sure that you're wanting things for you and not necessarily to
yeah,
impress other people,
yeah,
and keep up with everybody else.
yeah. And which brings us to this next question, because what's really interesting is because my grandparents, their generation was all about the government's gonna save you via Social Security. And
Mhm.
then my parents' generation was like, the only way to financial independence is through a job and through pensions and working 60 years.
Yeah.
And so kind of my generation, I'm a Xennial and kind of millennials, they're saying 401ks, that's going to be the thing. And now it seems like 401ks are not going to be even enough. So kind of
Yeah.
talking about strategies beyond the 401k.
Yeah, it's true. It's kind of interesting because I was reading something and I don't think people realize, I think it was like, I might have the year a little off, but I think it was like 1979 is when the first 401k was available. That's not that long ago. I mean, I was born in 81, so that's not that long ago. I mean, it's what, 40 something years. And so essentially, it's funny because we're not used to having to take care of ourselves on the money side because, like you said, government's going to help us or pension's going to get us through there, and so we're not as used to doing this, and it's really only one or two generations that have done this. I totally agree with what you were saying. I think the thing with the 401k that I think is the problem when
Mm,
it comes to whether it's enough or not is there's two things. Depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? Because if you're trying to accomplish early retirement, it's not the optimal vehicle to use because you have the 59 and a half rule and taxes on the money that you've deferred, especially if you're using the traditional 401k part of it. So it's not typically the most efficient vehicle to put in if that's your goal.
mm,
If your goal is, defer tax, it might be. Even the Roth 401k can sometimes get you there because at least the Roth portion is something you can get to. You can always get to your principal, right? You paid tax on it. Not in the 401k, but if you roll it out. But essentially, it's one of those things that there's a lot of different components with 401ks, and they've gotten very expensive. And so a lot of times people aren't realizing how expensive they are. So sometimes those can derail your plans because if you're in a fund that's, 1.5 or 2%, plus you're paying advisory fees, which people don't realize that they are, but they are,
mm,
then it can be an expensive vehicle to put money into.
mm.
And a lot of times, the unfortunate part about the 401k is that we don't really watch it that much. We kind of have our fund. It's usually a target date fund that we've chosen, which is fine. But we don't really watch what's going on. So mistakes kind of happen sometimes. Like I've had people who have had money being going into cash for like 3 years because they never bothered to look at their 401k. Well, that's not going to do very much good, especially since the market was up those 3 years. So
Mm.
we just have to stay really relevant on, paying attention to it, not necessarily leaning into the automatic side of things. Cause that's the thing is when it's automatic, you kind of don't pay attention to it, which is good and bad, in my opinion. Good because it gets you to do it, but bad because you're not paying attention to it. So it's not always the best vehicle out there. So I think that there's a love hate. I have a love hate relationship with 401ks. But I think in some respects, it can be a really good vehicle, but it can also hinder people down the line because you have, people don't know this, especially younger generations, but you have a thing called a required minimum distribution that has to come out. So let's say you're doing really well, you've saved outside of your 401k, and boom, at 73, you now have to take out what the government tells you to take out of your 401k and pay tax on it. Now you're letting government tell you how much you have to take out as a minimum. I mean, it just they can turn into a problem. Estate planning and generational tax on it has become a mess. There's just a lot of different things that can happen when you defer tax right now. So it's a balancing act.
Like I said, it's kind of I like how you're describing 401ks as strategic. It's not just putting it in. It's kind of like you have to have a reason for doing that.
Yeah,
Otherwise it's just sitting in, they call it retirement jail. It's just can't do anything.
exactly.
But
Oh, yeah, exactly. That is a great way. I might borrow that from you. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the reason that it's a great vehicle to take advantage of, right? If it's there and there's a match and there's things, it's great. But at the same time, we have this thing in our in our world, at least in the financial world, we put everything on automatic savings, automatic contribution, automatic.
Yeah.
And the thing is, automation is great, but there are technical difficulties that happen. There are changes that happen in your life. And it also doesn't allow you to challenge yourself a little bit. Like with a 401k, let's say you're making, I don't know, 150,000, okay? And you're putting 22,500 because you're under 50, which is the max at least for 2023. And you could put away more, but you're not because that's the max and I've hit the max. And so you don't look for anything else to do because you're not actively involved with your saving strategy. Same thing with, if you're saving into a bank account or into a brokerage account or something, you're not challenging yourself to do better and to push a little harder if everything's on automatic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. And then kind of moving forward is you talk about for your clients, you kind of take a new approach, bucket list planning. Can you explain this? And
Yeah, absolutely. So it's I would say I kind of made it up, but I'm sure there's other people that do this as their advisors. But basically what I think is that we have this concept that to be a good financial student, we're supposed to save, never experience anything in life right now, and then get 65, be a multi-billion millionaire and retire and have the time of our life. That's not reality
yeah.
in life anymore. I mean, I think you agree because you're laughing. I mean, it's not the way life works anymore.
Yeah.
And this is what we still have in our head as the way to do it. And so it's either like you have two kind of mindsets, which is that mindset, or YOLO, forget it. I'm just going to live my life and forget about savings. And there is a balance between this. You can be a saver and still experience life. And so if we can put together a bucket list and have people experience what their money can do for them, have many goals basically, and it can be a nice goal. It can be like going to Bali, or it can be going to on a cruise, or whatever it is. It can be, or my husband has a Corvette fund. I mean, they can be ostentatious, bigger goals, but to build those into your bigger financial plan allows you to enjoy your life now, plus you're still saving for the future. So your saving strategy includes your bucket list item that you're planning at the moment and your bigger plan. And then once you hit your goal in your bucket list plan, you can either use that money with zero guilt because that's what it was supposed to be used for, or you can say, I've changed my mind. I want to do this instead. Or, forget it. I'm happy. Let's roll that into my long-term savings, or let's take part of it to do that and do part of it. It gives you choice instead of running around taking all these trips without any kind of strategy of how you're going to pay for it, and then feeling that, oh my gosh, I have a $12,000 credit card bill because I didn't plan and I have no strategy of how I'm going to pay it off.
Mm,
That's kind of where that I've heard more times that taking a trip that they didn't plan for has started credit card debt.
mm,
It happens a lot. And so we want to stop that from starting a crisis that could happen.
yeah.
So essentially, building that in, and it's just a celebration that you're saving and you're building and you're doing what you're supposed to do. And we don't celebrate our wins enough when it comes to money.
Yeah. Yeah. When I realized that I could fall over, kill over the next day, I started viewing money differently, kind of spending it, kind of living in the moment, but also saving for the future. And how can people find out more about you?
Yeah. So our website's always the best place to go. So onevisionretire.com. We've got some resources there. If people are a little afraid of getting started with this or have done some stuff, but just have, I would say, lack of confidence when it comes to their money, there's a really good resource that's called Baby Step Your Way to Financial Independence that they can download and get a resource from that. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn too. So it's just
Yeah.
my name on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And for all the audience out there listening, Lisa for coming on, very well spoken, financial planning, financial literacy. I really enjoyed this discussion and be sure to follow her on all her socials. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was a great conversation.